Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest installment of our Meet the Authors webcast series. We're thrilled to have the authors of Business Architecture, The Missing Link in Strategy, Formulation, Implementation, and Execution with us, Pierre Hadaya and Bernard Gagnon. And so, as you know, BA Institute invites down authors of recent books to come share their insights with our members. And we appreciate both of you taking the time out of your schedule to introduce your new book to us. Both of the authors have been also kind enough to extend our members an exclusive discount. This book is going to be available on Amazon at a discounted rate of just over $30 US through the end of April. You'll need to buy the book by April 30 in order to get the discount. But gentlemen, we thank you very much for that, and we thank you for the work that you've done on the book. Recently, we've also had other webcasts featuring folks like Jim Siner, James Taylor, Andrew, and Matthias Kirchmer. And so we are thrilled to continue this series of webcasts and keep you up to date with the latest thinking that's happening in the industry. And so now, without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to our first presenter, Pierre Hadaya.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. So Bernard and I are going to do a small presentation that basically gives an overview of our book, Business Architecture, The Missing Link in Strategy, Formulation, Implementation, and Execution. So to begin, of course, we talk about the word strategy. So what is a strategy? Because strategy has become the framework that organizations use to differentiate themselves with competitors. And Bernard and I did a lot of work, and we came to two important conclusions. First, a strategy is not a business objective, it's not a series of actions, and it's not a product or services. And the second thing that we found out was strategy is about making choices to deliver value. So based on these premises and building on the shoulders of giants, we provide the definition that you see on the slide. With strategy, it's the behavioral guidelines an organization adopts to create a unique mix of values for its owners, customers, partners, and employees to differentiate itself in a positive way from competitors. I will not go into the details of exactly what is part of a strategy, but I just want to give you an overview of what you see on the right of the slide. You can see a graph, which starts, of course, with the values, mission, and vision of the organization, that you all know what they are, as well as the 4 stakeholder value propositions. Because compared to many people that have written in the field, for Bernard and I, there are 4 key stakeholders. Of course, the customers, which you see in the middle, you have to bring value to your customer, attract them, retain them, develop relationships. But also on the top, you see the owner value proposition. If somebody invests in your company, they have to get a good ROI. They have to get some value for investing in that company. And then you see the partner value proposition. A very simple example would be Toyota suppliers. If you decide to work with Toyota, you will have all the force of Toyota to help you become more efficient. And finally, but not the least, employee value proposition. Because of course, employees reflect in their actions what your company wants to become. So a strategy is an integrated set of all of these components to create a behavior that is going to create value so the firm can differentiate itself from its competitors. Based on this definition, as you can see in the title of the book, we always talk about formulation, implementation, and execution. I will just take a few minutes to explain this because it's very important. Because there are different groups of activities. The first, formulation. As you can see on the top, it's about analyzing the internal and external environment of the organization, identifying strategy alternatives, and choosing the best ones. Okay? For us, to be sure that the strategy is right, you have to analyze your environments and you have to propose several alternatives before choosing the right one. Once you formulated the strategy, then you have to implement it, which you can see on the right. And by implementation, we mean transforming the functioning of the organization and the assets of the firm so that you can align them to what you previously formulated. And finally, but not the least, you can see the execution, which basically you're realizing your activities, you've transformed yourself to bring values to the 4 customer value propositions that we mentioned just before, and of course, as aligned to what was previously formulated about the strategy. And these 3 group of activities, there's another group of activity called engage and govern that overarches the previously mentioned activities. And these activities are basically concerned motivation, removing barriers, governance, monitoring internal and external events to be sure that the right activities and the right transformations are being done to be able to formulate, implement, and execute the strategy. And just before I pass to the next slide, I want to emphasize here that these activities are done continuously. So it's not something you start and at the end of the year you finish the formulation, then you implement, and then you start executing year 3. Everything is done continuously, so you have to have a good process, a good system to manage this macro process, and Bernard is going to talk about it a little bit later. So, now that we know what formulating, implementing, and execution is, what you can see on this slide is basically firms have problems with each of these phases of the macro process. As you can see, only 45% of firms are satisfied with the formulation process. 61% of firms have difficulties implementing if they actually can implement the strategy, and up to 70% say that they are not able to execute their strategy. What does that mean overall? It means that between 50 and 90% of strategic initiatives are considered failures by organizations, which is a pretty important number. So, why so many failures? This slide is basically just a small summary. There's a lot more information in our first chapter in the book. We list here 8 of the main causes of the difficulties. I will not go into the detail of each, but I will, for example, give you 4 of them. For example, one main cause is, as you can see, number 1 on the slide, the strategy is selected without a proper analysis of its feasibility. We have seen this very often in organization, Bernard and I. Organization, when they formulate a strategy, they do not identify at a high level what transformation they have to do. They do not try to assess how much these transformations are going to cost or the benefits that this transformation are going to cost. So basically, they decide a strategy in a haste, which means that very often, 2-3 years later, they realize that not only are they not able to implement their strategy, but very often their competitor was able to do something very similar in a more efficient and faster way prior to them. So that was example number 1. I'll give you another example. The long-term financial plan and yearly budgets are not aligned with the strategy. Because this is very important, because the financial plan and yearly budget, they rarely correctly take into account the size and timing of revenues and expenses expected to occur as a result of the implementation and execution of the strategy. Basically, what we're trying to say here is the long-term financial plan and revenues are not tied to what we call the transformation plan, which Bernard is going to explain a little bit later. And this is a big problem because this gives false promises. So we expect benefits sooner than they happen, which in time can lead a lot of demotivation from the troops who are actually trying to implement and execute the strategy. I'll give you just 2 more examples. For example, the wrong transformations are done. As you can see, number 4. This is a huge problem because number 1, most companies worry about the short term What are we going to do today? This year, we need the numbers for this year. And this is one example. Another issue is many managers or VPs, they basically worry about their own transformation to alleviate their own problems. And what this does, this short-term focus and this localized focus on transformation makes it that the strategy is never actually implemented nor executed. And a last example, but not the least, I will just show you number 7, lack of leadership. If you want your strategy to function, leaders have to communicate, they have to be involved in the decision, they have to remove the barriers for the employees. They have a lot of work to do for the strategy to be able to be implemented and executed. But unfortunately, as you know, their schedule is extremely busy, and not all leaders or VPs or executives or whoever is involved take enough time to help people and motivate them to get the strategy implemented and executed. So from this, what can an organization do? Well, in the past, Bernard and I have went through the literature, and we found many best practices, very interesting best practices that have been proposed to help organizations improve their strategic record. But still, something is missing. If we see a number at 50 to 90% failures, there's definitely something that is still missing. So from that, we created an approach which we call the business architecture approach, which is the subject of the book. So for us, a business architecture approach encompasses 3 components. Number 1, it's what we call the target business architecture. Number 2, which is a transformation plan. And number 3, which is the practice, the business architecture team, who is involved in designing the target business architecture, the transformation plan, as well as other activities. So to start, before talking about the target business architecture, something that was very important for us when we wrote the book, we wanted, as I mentioned before, build on our work on the work of giants. So we really wanted to talk about architecture and not something, as we say in French, simile-architecture, something that is not really architecture. So we did some work and some research, and we found the definition that you see in the slide, which defines an architecture, which is the fundamental organization of a system embodied in its components and the relationships that each of these components have with each other and with the environment. This definition is very important because architecture means identifying the key components, whether they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the relationship between these components. Okay? Because the architecture of a system determines how the components function together, are integrated as a whole, but it does not define each of the components individually. To continue, I will give the floor to Bernard.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here with us. Thank you again to Greg to give us this opportunity. Okay, so if we look at business architecture, okay, Pierre just defined architecture as a whole, in general, basically. And now business architecture, the way we see it is there's a system at the core of a business architecture, and that's an organization. So just like the watch, the architecture of the watch you just saw on the slide, on the previous slide, its architecture defines how it functions. The business architecture of the business or an organization defines how that business will function. Okay, that's key to us. So basically, when we design a target business architecture, we're defining it so that the functioning of the organization is aligned to the strategy that was previously formulated. So basically, the strategy serves as a set of requirements that the target business architecture needs to meet. Okay, that's your starting point. That's why we insist so much on strategy. The architecture, the functioning or the architecture of the organization needs to be aligned with the strategy. And the job of a business architect, basically, is to figure out what's the set of components, and we'll go through that in a moment. What are these components, and how should that are needed, and how should they work together? Okay, that's our job. And basically, when we started working on our book, we had read all sorts of work already on all sorts of types of resources available to organization and so on, but there was something missing. We always found that this is not the complete answer, or wasn't integrated well enough to our liking. So we invested a lot of time in developing the framework that you see in front of you, and it's basically we define a business architecture as being there's 9 types of building blocks from which you assemble a business architecture. The primary one, the one at the core, is business capabilities. Okay, that's one that strategists are aligned to. That they look at the strengths and weaknesses of an organization a lot of time through its business capabilities. They analyze those and so on, and they define, okay, we've got strength there, we've got weaknesses there, and they use those terms. So, and we wanted to hook ourselves to that and basically form a continuum with the work of strategists. So the primary thing that we've got is business capabilities. And the way we define them is it's a set of resources that together give the ability to an organization to deliver something of value, okay? Whether it's a product, a financial report, or whatever, these are all things that you need to have the capability to do, okay? And we started looking, okay, how do you build a capability now, okay? And what's needed for an organization to have a given capability? What we discovered is you need a process, okay? If you want to build a product, let's say a car, you're going to need a process to assemble the car. Okay? If you don't have that series of steps well defined, either you won't be able to assemble the car, or you're going to have to sit back, think about your thing, and define the process first. And then once you've got it, then you'll be able to to build that car, to assemble that car. You're going to need know-how. Okay, if you need to do, let's say, a car, you need to do welding. Well, you need to know how to do welding. You need to know how to do assembly and so on. You're going to need information. And in the case of a car, information would be the plan of the car itself, and so on. You're going to need to organize your teams of people, your numerous people you're going to have to assemble the car. You're going to need to organize them in teams, okay, that are going to do different things. You're going to need different business functions. You're going to need people that know how to do welding, other need to do assembly, and so on and so on. And you're going to need technology assets. In this case, in the case of a car, it would be a lot of tools or assembly jigs and things like that. Some businesses, in some business capabilities, you also need natural resource deposits. If you're a mining company and you don't have an ore deposit, you're in trouble. You don't have the capability to produce, let's say, iron or aluminum or whatever. And also what we've discovered through a mandate that we did some time ago is sometimes you need to consider brands, because the brand architecture of an organization can have ramification all through the organization. Okay, so that's the basic set of components that we use to define a complete business architecture. Okay, next slide. Okay, we define enterprise architectures slightly differently than most people. We sort of generalize the term. For us, the enterprise architecture is not only about business architecture and IT enterprise architecture. There's other technology architectures that need to be included as well. Let's say you're UPS. You've got trucks, you've got airplanes, you've got distribution centers and so on. All of these things, that forms an additional technology architecture that you need to include in your overall enterprise architecture. Okay. The way that you see our star there at the left, and you see that there's components in red, is basically when you look at technology assets, each of the technology architectures, enterprise architectures, will decompose the technology assets as viewed by business architects into all sorts of other very specialized building blocks, okay? Like an IT and information system, a truck, an airplane, all these things will be decomposed there, and information will be turned into a data architecture. Okay, the other thing that as Pierre mentioned earlier, we've got for us, business architecture is about three main components to the business architecture approach. There's the target business architecture, of course, that we just talked about, but another very important component is the transformation plan. It's all nice to have a target business architecture, but if you haven't figured out how you're going to get there, well, you haven't delivered the full value that the enterprise needs from your work. You need to figure out, okay, what's the most efficient and effective way to get to that target, okay? And in chapter 4 of the book, we present a full methodology that we've developed over the years to create that transformation plan, develop all the logic of what needs to be done, when, and how, and while considering all sorts of factors. The star on the right shows all the factors that need to be considered. The strategy, of course, the current architecture of the firm, the target architecture, regulation, the cost, the benefits of the projects, change management. If you are an organization that you're not in the habit of transforming yourself, it's extremely important to consider change management in your transformation plan. You cannot start a huge project right from the start. People will have too strong a doubt in terms of the ability of the firm to transform itself. You need to create a mindset in the minds of people that say, yes, we can do this. Okay? And that starts by doing smaller projects, demonstrating success, making adjustments, and just building the momentum. Okay? The third component is the team itself. Okay? And for us, from our point of view, the business architecture team, what we call the business architecture office, needs to be some businesses put it under IT, and that's the wrong place. Been there, done that, got the scars, don't want to repeat that ever again. It really needs to be under the business. If you're not reporting to the business side of things, you don't have the clout needed to do it. And optimally, it's under a chief strategy officer. Not all organizations have one, but there's usually somebody that performs sort of that role. Okay, a chief strategy officer is in our mind, it's a role. It's not necessarily a person dedicated to that role. Okay, in a lot of a smaller organization, the CEO performs that role, and it's perfectly fine. In super large organization, you're going to have somebody dedicated to it. So the business architecture office, from our point of view, in a larger organization, needs to be part of a set of teams that all report to the chief strategy officer. Okay, the business architecture office needs to perform a number of needs to be very active in a number of activities, and needs to support a number of others. Okay, the activities that you see in dark blue, which is to define the target business architecture and to elaborate the transformation plan. Those are the core activities of the business architecture office. The three in light blue are activities where the business architects need to be involved. Like formulating a strategy is one where business architect needs to be involved because of the necessity to validate the feasibility of a given strategy option. We need to be in there and help manage it. Pierre and I, we've both seen, and I'm sure many other people have seen that, businesses that select a strategy and 2 years down the road they figure out, well, it's not feasible for us. It's way too ambitious or whatever. If they had done the feasibility analysis earlier enough, they could have selected a much better strategy. Okay. Architecting the CTAs, like the IT enterprise architecture and the other, what we call it, the technology architectures, all of them, business architects need to work with the people that do that, like the IT enterprise architects and others, to make sure that all of the business architecture and the IT enterprise architecture and so on, it's all coherent and it all builds on one of each other. Okay, the last thing is trying to go into start a business architecture team in an organization when it's not integrated into the process whereby the organization formulates and tries to implement the strategy. If it doesn't work, you need to be very well integrated into that, into that process system of processes. What you see on the screen there is we've defined a reference business architecture for what we call the strategy management system, and it's a complete set of processes that takes an organization from the start of the formulation of a strategy to through its transformation and to the execution of the strategy and measuring the KPIs and then verifying that everything is going well and so on. So we've defined a complete reference architecture for that. It includes all the processes. It includes all of the organizational structure. It needs to be supported by an organizational structure that we saw a little bit earlier. It needs to be supported by expertise, by knowledge, or by information. There's all of that, decision rights, and also on. It's all there, and that's the subject of I think it's 40 pages of chapter 6. It's all defined in there, and it's really about making sure that the work of business architects is really well integrated into the routine of the organization to transform itself. Okay. So that completes what we wanted to say about the book. You see the cover there, and I'll repeat what Greg said earlier. It's going to be at a special price for a period of time until the 1st of May. The price will be reduced. We offer consulting services and training. If you are interested, it's all described on our website.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you both. And so I think, some of our members just might be a little curious on your background, and so I wanted to give that a quick mention. I've got some questions that we wanted to ask you before we let you go, and then I'll wrap things up with an overview of some additional resources and activities that will be happening for the rest of the year. Dr. Hadaya, I should mention for everyone, is a PhD. He is also a professor at the School of Management of Université du Québec of Montreal. He's been working with organizations on their transformation efforts, and he brings that experience to the book as well. And Bernard Gagnon has more than 30 years of experience working with organizations in a host of different industries, including aerospace, banking, investment, telecom, and also the utility industries. And so they are the co-founders of this book. They are also the co-founders of Asante Group, and their mission is to help folks with these transformation efforts. And a big part forward with that, with the book focused on business architecture, being the missing link, is a way to kick off their efforts in the space. And so we're thrilled to have you both come down today and tell our folks about the book. We're also thrilled that you've joined our frequent contributor program, so folks will be able to see ongoing articles from you as your practice expands and as you're working with some of your clients in the field. But before we let you go, a few questions and thoughts that you inspired while you were chatting. A lot of the work that you guys have done has been focused on business strategy. And I just wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about that and what exactly do you see as the relationship between business strategy and business architecture? Who would like to take that?
I'll take that one. For us, as I mentioned before, strategy is the framework that firms must use to create and maintain a competitive advantage. So for us, basically everything leads to strategy. So how do you get from strategy to the target business architecture, which I think is what you mentioned is, people must not forget when you design, when you formulate a strategy and you choose the mission, vision, value proposition that I mentioned before, you also design at a high level the strategic capabilities that you are going to need to be able to bring value to your stakeholders. And so the end of the strategy formulation process, which is the identification and design at a high level of the capabilities, strategy capabilities, well, it's the beginning of designing a target architecture, which, as Bernard showed you, is everything is anchored on the capabilities. So you take the capabilities that you identify in the formulation, and then what do? Well, you design them into more detail, and you go through the building blocks that make up these capabilities. So for us, this is the relationship.
And from the capabilities, it tells you what are the processes you need, what information, what expertise, and so on that you're going to need. Yeah.
Excellent, John. Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I took away from the content of the book as well is, you know, you've talked about some things that are well known out there, some things that folks may have also seen in the BizBook, but you've also talked about a lot of concepts and things outside of that. Could I ask you just to recap a little bit more about the framework you spoke about and the 9 specific types of building blocks, and maybe, you know, why did you include those and maybe not some others?
Okay. It all stems from the definition of architecture that we showed earlier. And that's main criteria for when we design our framework is we need to have all the types of building blocks in there that we need to really define the complete business architecture. Okay, that's why we've added things like brands and natural resource deposits and other things. Another criteria we used in defining our framework is we wanted to make sure that the language that we use in that framework is pretty much aligned with language that exists in businesses today, and we wanted to make sure also that it corresponds to what's in the strategy literature, in the enterprise resource literature, like things like dynamic capabilities, resource-based view of the firm, all that stuff, and the business process and management thing. We wanted all of that to be fairly well aligned, because the last thing we want to do is to have difficulty having people understand our language. We wanted our language to slip into the enterprises and be very well understood from the start. Okay? So that's why we used the 9 concepts that we've used to form our framework.
If I can just add something, Greg. We needed the right amount of building blocks, not too many, not too few. Yeah. And I'll just give you an example. One of the companies both Bernard and I worked with, they tried, I don't know how many building blocks they have. I think they had 20, I would say between 20 and 40. So where do you start? Where do you finish? Because don't forget that everything is related to everything, because you're trying to architecture. So you need the right amount. It has to be able to describe the firm in the right detail, but not with any superflu, as you would say in French.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your response there for both of you. And then before we let you go, my last question is, if I can ask you to explain to our members your thoughts behind the relationship between business architecture and business agility.
Okay, that's an interesting one. We've done a lot of work lately on business agility. Not the agile methodology, but business agility as a whole. How do you make sure that an organization is really agile? And what we mean by that is that it is able to quickly and effectively respond to market changes, okay? And possibly lead them and cause them. That's the optimal. Difficult to attain, but that's hopefully organization can attain that. Okay. So the thing is, what we've discovered, there's a lot of things in agility that's part of the culture. A lot of have you got good leadership? Have you got good communication and all that? Yes, that's definitely part of it. But there's a big part of it is, okay, are your processes agile? Are they designed to be agile? Are your technology associated to machines, like let's say you've got a production line, is it agile? Can you switch the model of product that this thing builds every day? Can you switch from minute to minute to one model to another and to respond in a very agile way to the demand that's coming in? All of that is what we're looking at, and it's basically, we realize that the business architecture of an enterprise is really at the core of making it agile. When you design that business architecture, you need to have that in mind. Okay, so if the strategy tells you we need to be more agile, we need to be more flexible, faster, okay, you need to design the business architecture with that in mind.
If I can just add a few words on the connection between business architecture and agility, I will just sum it up by saying capabilities, because as you remember, Greg, we mentioned the link between strategy and business architecture is capabilities. And again, the link between business architecture and agility for us is the capabilities. Do you have the capabilities to be agile in X, Y, and Z, to be able to respond quickly to market and changes in market demand?
Just to conclude, there's the whole idea in the literature of dynamic capabilities. A capability that helps you basically evolve as a company. If you look at, and really, to evolve is you need to be evolve quickly and effectively to meet market demand. And one of the capabilities that the primary dynamic capability of the organization is basically the strategy management system that we've talked about. That's the system that makes sure that the company continuously evolves and continues at the same pace as the market evolves. Okay, so that's the driver of the agility through the organization.
And one of, as you know, Greg, and I guess we want to shout out to your members, is we're going to write a few articles the coming years, and these are going to base basically on business agility, and of course we will talk more in depth about the relationship between business agility and business architecture.
Yes, and we look forward to that. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both. I think you guys have put a lot of passion into the book, and I think have a lot of interesting perspectives that our members will appreciate. So Pierre, Hadaya, and Gagnon, I thank you both for your time coming down today. Best of luck with the new book, and we're glad to help promote that out to our members. And as we wrap up, I just want to give a few words to some of the offerings that BA Institute will be supporting throughout the year. As folks know, one of our staples is that all of the training courses that we offer are delivered by practitioners for practitioners, and that is also true for all of our business architecture training. Those courses are updated on a constant basis because we're always delivering those classes. And so the learning paths have gone through a number of major updates for 2018. You can check that out on the website, but this is a small thumbnail. One of the other additions that folks will see is there's a greatly expanded number of certificates now in the program. In addition to the business process management and business architecture offerings we've had out in the marketplace for 10 plus years, we now have a unique program focused all around digital business that's tied to the launch of our new community, digbizinstitute.org. And we have, in addition to that, several new certificates now that are 4 course requirements: Agile Business Analysis, Operational Excellence. We have both an associate and a professional level, and also our Digital Decisioning and Analytics certificate. All those classes and courses that I mentioned, we make available in the most popular methods possible. We do a tremendous amount of in-house training where we have the ability to customize that to your company, your industry, current projects that you're on. You'll also see us run our fairly standard schedule of public events in 2018. Our first event of the year will be kicking off in Chicago the week of April 23, and then we'll be in San Francisco in June, Washington, D.C. in September, and New York in November. We also run about 100 online classes a year. We tend to cycle through our catalog about once a quarter. The sessions for Q2 are already underway. And then Q3, you'll see us start up again with a lot of the 101 and intro classes in July, and we'll follow through that cycle again in October. Last but not least, for those of you that have challenging schedules, and more of us do these days, we have about 24 of our classes are also available on demand. And so those can be taken 24/7, completely at your leisure. And so we encourage you to explore the website and look at some of the options there. And we're always available to have complimentary consultations, either for yourself as an individual, or if your organization is exploring group training. We have an online scheduling tool that you can use and pick a day and time, and we'd be happy to have that conversation with you and perhaps connect you with some of our subject matter experts, like the 2 gentlemen we've talked to today, Linda Finley, and some of our other faculty members that are focused on business architecture and related topics. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, and we look forward to hosting you at an upcoming Meet the Author webcast. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.